Yeah,
two
two
fifths.
fifths.
And then I found a quote today, which I'm guessing you saw. This is from Martin Indyk, who's a former ambassador to Israel from the United States, and he's been a guest here a lot. Look at what he said. We can put it on the screen. Netanyahu is using the Republican Congress for a photo op for his election campaign, and the Republicans are using Bibi, or Benjamin Netanyahu, for their campaign against Obama. He goes on to say, unfortunately, the United States relationship will take the hit. It would be far wiser for us to stay out of their politics and for them to stay out of ours. Martin Indyk. How about that, huh?
I think he's 100% right. To give you a sense, I happened to be at the White House on Wednesday when Boehner announced that he had invited and that Netanyahu had accepted this, and a top White House official was flabbergasted, said that we got no advance warning. We found out about it, them in the White House, when Boehner announced it to the press. And to make you get a sense of really how, forgive me, wicked this whole thing is, the Secretary of State, John Kerry, met with the Israeli ambassador to the United States for 2 hours on Tuesday, and Ron Dermer, the Israeli ambassador, according to the State Department, never mentioned the fact that Netanyahu was in negotiations and finally agreed to come to Washington, not to see the president, but to go to Capitol Hill, speak to a joint session of Congress, and criticize the president's policies. I have to say I'm shocked.
It was Secretary Kerry who had a pretty good comeback to Boehner's political stunt here. And I wonder, and I wonder what your thought is on this, if in the end Netanyahu won't back out of this, because members of his own Mossad have come out and said this is a horrible idea, and so have members of his own political party. Of course, his political opponents are screaming up and down. The newspapers over there are going wild over this. It just seems like they think we don't pay any attention and we're just a bunch of complete morons, the United States citizens, like we wouldn't pick up on what's happening here.
Well, here's the thing that's so interesting about it. You know, it's 2 weeks before the election, and, you know, supposedly, and I think Martin Indyk has it right, I mean, Bibi Netanyahu is an extremely savvy and successful politician. He wouldn't come here unless he thought it were to his political advantage. But one of the big issues in Israel is always the relationship between Israel and the United States. And, you know, even when they're fighting with each other, the Israelis want to know that the U.S. has their back. For Netanyahu to do something that is going to be seen as such a deliberate and really pretty egregious snub of President Obama when Obama's going to be in power for the next year and 3 quarters would seem to me to be a very risky political strategy for Prime Minister Netanyahu. Now, he knows his politics better than I do, but,
sure,
you know, for Netanyahu to come here and side with Boehner against Obama on Iran seems to me to be very dicey politics.
You know, the last president, George Bush, used to say you must stop the expansion of the settlements. So what does Israel do? They move on with expanding the settlements. This president says you got to stop expanding the settlements, and they just keep expanding the settlements. And then leaving some in the White House to whisper this is because Netanyahu doesn't really want a two-state solution. If he did, he would be working toward one. It's all very confusing and highly complicated.
Well, but let's talk about Iran. I don't think anybody objects to the idea that Prime Minister Netanyahu has a different view of Iran, the threat from Iran.
Oh, of course. How couldn't he?
And the negotiations that the West are carrying out with Iran. I don't think anybody objects to that.
No.
And, you know, look, it's an existential threat. The Iranian leaders have talked about wiping Iran off the face of the
100%.
earth. Whatever Netanyahu wants to think and say about that is fine. But for him to come here, to ignore the president, to not even let him know he was coming, and to sneak in to come talk before Congress with the president's opponents to criticize the president's policy, that's a different thing. I mean, that gets to sort of just a question of diplomacy and protocol.
I'm now the last person without a book. Because I know Mrs. Soup is coming out with another book, and I just heard Gretchen talk about she's got some kind of book coming out about violin and Miss American and all kinds of stuff. I'll obviously win that. I'm the only one without a book.
And boy, if there was anybody who could write a book, it would be you.
At least 3 pages about the rebels and something on Cheetos.
Well, I thought you were complaining that
Glozilla.
you didn't have a copy of Lorraine's new book. Do you want a copy of Lorraine's new book called Mr. and Mrs. Sunday Suppers, which is coming out next Tuesday?
Who came up with that name, Mr. and Mrs. Sunday Suppers?
Well,
because we call it supper down in Mississippi, but I figured you highfalutin Harvard types called it dinner or something.
No. Lorraine came up with suppers, and we have Sunday suppers, but we have them any day of the week, and it was her idea.
Well, that's a great idea. First, there was
they're
a soup.
scrumptious, too. They're finger-licking good, these meals.
Well, I look forward to having some of the meals. I can't read, obviously, but if I could, I would.
Well, look, if you would like, Lorraine will give you a copy of the book, and she might make dinner for you sometime.
I'd rather the latter. I mean, I would appreciate the book greatly, but I'd infinitely appreciate the food if she just come up.
Well,
I think everybody here on the news deck would enjoy that. All we have right now is these churros sort of Cheetos.
Well, you're too busy having dinner with the president, all that stuff.
That was lunch with the president.
With
you were the one at the White House on Wednesday when Netanyahu stuff bubbled.
All right, goodbye, Shaq. Oh, wait a minute. We got to